Next, on Investigative Report, we bring you the stories of men who face sexual harassment by their female employers. Society would like you to believe that it is only the men who saunter up and make women feel nervous with their sexual advances. But what if the tables were turned? How does that same society view the 20% of men who complain to the US EEOC about sexual harassment on a daily basis? In this episode of Investigative Report, we give you 5 stories of men who face sexual assault on the job and firings or demotions if they refuse those advances. We'll give you the stories of men who face sexual assault on a daily basis, but were too afraid to report it. We'll bring you the story of a female manager who sexually harassed 2 male employees under her supervision. When the one couldn't take it, he decided to quit. When the second employee found out about the first one, he reported it. After the report, he was terminated without cause. Our first story comes to us from Ethan Barron of the Bay Area News Group and concerns a young male manager at Chipotle restaurant in San Jose, California, who suffered sexual harassment from a female supervisor who groped him, propositioned him, simulated sex acts using vegetables, and hit him on the head with a pan. And this information would not have been made public without a lawsuit filed by the federal government on the employee's behalf. Now, in most cases involving sexual harassment, when the perpetrator is male, his name is made public. But in this case, the female perpetrator's name was not made public. But the employee, Mr. Austin Milton, started working as a service manager for the fast casual Mexican restaurant chain back in 2012 in Cupertino and was transferred to the North Capitol Avenue location where the harassment by the general manager began in 2015. Now, this according to the civil rights suit from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. In his own words, Mr. Melton said, and I quote, "This was my first job at the high school. It was hard to speak up about the harassment to management and then to the EEOC, but it was the right thing to do. Now, according to the lawsuit, the general manager slapped, groped, and grabbed Mr. Melton's buttocks and groin area numerous times. The supervisor also told Melton, who was 22 at the time, 'I'll pay for sex, and I want to watch you have sex with your girlfriend.' And that's what the suit alleges. Now, Chipotle did not admit wrongdoing in the settlement, but agreed to pay Melton $95,000 and impose a sweeping array of changes to policies and procedures about sexual harassment in the workplace. Now, this was all done in U.S. District Court in San Jose. But the suit claimed Melton's supervisor often asked about his sex life and those of the employees, and it made gestures about that. Even on Instagram, she sent him pictures of herself in her underwear. This was highly unprofessional. Now, the female supervisor also was prone to violence. On one occasion, she hit Mr. Melton over the head with the pan, like I said. Mr. Melton also saw the general manager throw kitchen items at other crew members, slap crew members on the back of the head, and punched a wall until her hands bled. In September 2015, Melton and a coworker complained to the general manager's supervisor, the team leader, but the harassment continued. Melton complained about the team leader the following month, and the leader called the general manager into a meeting that included Melton, who expressed his grievances according to the lawsuit. Now, the general manager became hostile and started screaming at Mr. Melton. Nevertheless, the harassment behavior continued. The general manager continued to post sex scoreboard and continued to make several comments. After that meeting, employees and managers retaliated against Melton, with managers telling the employee not to talk to him. In October 2015, employees locked Mr. Milton into a walk-in freezer. He pounded on the door and yelled for someone to open and help him. Now, nobody responded, so Mr. Milton escaped through an emergency exit. And when he re-entered the restaurant, he discovered that a steel rod had been lodged into a hole in the door to prevent him from opening that door. Commission lawyer James Baker noted that the news released that only about 16% of sexual harassment charges filed with the agency are brought by males. Federal laws protect workers from sexual harassment and sexual abuse regardless of the gender. Now, Baker said, Austin was simply trying to do his job and he worked to protect himself and his girlfriend. Baker also said he faced conditions that no employee should have to accept in exchange for a paycheck. Our second story involves two young men who reported sexual harassment at a New Jersey grocery store. Two young men began working as assistant managers at a New Jersey grocery store in 1999. Both males filed a job discrimination complaint with the EEOC after they stopped working at the store. Now, the first male claims that a then female assistant manager made unwelcome sexual comments to him shortly after he started working at the store. This woman was eventually promoted to store manager a few months later. Wow, that line, if you F up, you move up. The young man claims that he went through harassment and it continued, and that the store manager talked to him about her sexual desires and her affairs with other male workers. He also states that she rubbed her body suggestively against his and flashed her bra and breasts at him in the store. Now, the young man quit because of the female manager's behavior. The second employee claims that he experienced similar harassment. He contends that the store manager called him baby, told other workers that she was his girlfriend, and flashed her bra at him as well. Now, if this was a guy, he would already been terminated and arrested. Anyway, getting back to the story. When this young man discovered that the first employee had quit because of the harassment, he argued with the store manager, who suspended him immediately. The young man complained the next day to the district manager. However, the company fired him for unprofessional conduct, but not her. Now, after investigating both complaints, the EEOC of the United States filed a lawsuit against the store, claiming that the two men were sexually harassed in violation of the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employment, discrimination, and harassment on the basis of gender. Does not matter whether you're male or female. Now, EEOC's lawsuit also claims that the store illegally punished the second employee for complaining about the harassment. The lawsuit is still in court. If it's not resolved through the settlement, the EEOC will present its case to the jury, which will determine whether the company should be held responsible for the female manager's behavior. Our story number 3, which comes to us by J.C. Ford. Accused of sexual harassment, Andrea Ramsey ends her Kansas City congressional run. You heard me right. Somebody running for office is a sexual harasser. Now, a woman running to flip a Kansas congressional seat from red to blue next year ended her campaign after allegations surfaced that she had sexually harassed and then fired a former subordinate. Andrea Ramsey, 56, is a retired businesswoman, executive who worked in a nonprofit sector before deciding to run for office as a Democrat in next year's congressional midterm elections. She was one of a growing number of women inspired to seek office in the wake of President Trump's election. But this month, the Kansas City Star newspaper asked her about a 2005 lawsuit that accused her of sexually harassing a man at Lab 1, where she was executive vice president of human resources, and then firing him after he rejected her advances. Now, amazing, right? The suit was against the company, not Miss Ramsey specifically, as it was settled in 2006. In response, Ms. Ramsey said, "I eliminated an employee's position. That man decided to bring a lawsuit against the company, not against me." She covered her ass. "He named me an allegation claiming I fired him because he refused to have sex with me. That's a lie." End quote. Her words, not mine. Now, Ms. Ramsey is the only woman in public life to face consequences from a sexual harassment accusation since the journalistic expose spawned the Me Too movement. She said that her political opponents were using this and false allegations against her as she criticized the Democratic Party for implementing a zero-tolerance standard. She says, "For me, that means the vindictive terminated employees' false accusations are enough for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee to decide not to support our promising campaign." Now, she says, "I would suggest and like to add that Mrs. Ramsey, and believe all women, while appreciating the fact that her accuser was not a woman." Ms. Meredith Kelly, the communications director of the DCCC, said in an email statement, "Members or candidates must all be held to a higher standard. If anyone is guilty of sexual harassment or sexual assault, that person should not hold public office." End quote. Now, Ms. Ramsey was one of several Democrats running to contest the House seat held by Representative Kevin Yoder in next year's midterm election. Now, although Democratic primary is not until August, Ms. Ramsey told the New York Times earlier this month that her campaign had already raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, she has never held public office before, but said she was emboldened to try when Mr. Yoder voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. She said, "I was not going to abide by that vote. It crystallized my decision to step up and run." Now, Ms. Ramsey was endorsed by Emily's List, a national organization that supports female and abortion rights candidates. In an email statement, the organization acknowledged that Ms. Ramsey had entered her candidacy. They said, "We support her decision and we wish her well." Ms. Ramsey did not immediately respond to a voice message seeking comment about her decision. The man who filed the lawsuit, Gary Funkhauser, did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Now, a wave of sexual harassment allegations in recent months, overwhelmingly directed at men, have led to the resignation in industry, including entertainment, journalism, and technology. Several politicians have also said they will step down or not seek re-election in the face of harassment allegations, including the then Senator Al Franken, you know what happened to him, and Representative Trent Franks, Blank Farenthold, and John Conyers Jr. Now, on balance, it is far more important to me that women are stepping forward to tell their stories and confront their harassers than it is to continue our campaign. And this is what Ms. Ramsey wrote. But it wasn't important to her that the men step forward and tell their stories. Not gender, just people, man. Story number 4. A male grad student sues his female feminist professor at the university for sexual harassment. A feminist professor. Now, there's more than one side to Me Too, and some feminists aren't happy about it. Not only was a female philosophy professor and prominent feminist investigated by New York University for sexual harassment of a male grad student, but now the grad student is suing both his former professor and the university. NYU has acknowledged that Mr. Nimrod Reitman told a vice provost 2 years before receiving his PhD that Avatar Ronell, at the time his doctoral advisor, was sexually harassing him. It failed to take any action and thus prevent further harm to Reitman. Now, the former student said in the lawsuit that was filed, Reitman accused Ronell of intentionally renowned feminist, literary theorist, and philosophy professor of sexually harassing, assaulting, and stalking him for 3 years. It devastated him and caused serious damage that he will likely suffer for years to come. Ronell created a false romantic relationship between herself and Reitman, and by threat, among many other things, not allowing him to advance to his PhD. Now, Reitman claims he turned down offers from other schools specifically to study under supervision of Ronell, but she demanded much unpaid labor from him and touched him inappropriately throughout their academic relationship. He was required to be available to her at all hours of the day and night and to schedule his life around hers and her needs. Ronell forced Reitman to distance himself from friends and family, and she would often burst into a jealous rage when his attention was with them and not fully devoted to her. Now, throughout Reitman's time at NYU, Ronell would touch, grab, fondle, and kiss Reitman over his objections, and often demanded that he act in kind. Otherwise, she would refuse to work with him. She also demanded that he communicate with her in an over-the-top, effusive language, including the constantly expressive his love for her. And his failure to do so would result in Ronell's angrily reprimanding him and refusing to work with him. But he needed this woman. Now, Ronell allegedly issued Reitman an unmistakable warning if he turned on her, telling him stories of the vengeance she enacted of those who had wronged her. She referred to this as her mafia capabilities. Now, after getting his PhD, Reitman filed a Title IX complaint against Ronell, which included witnesses' interviews, emails, messages, texts, and voicemail messages, including photographs. The school upheld the sexual harassment claims, but not the assault or stalking. In response, Ronell used her influence and vast connections to organize a campaign of misinformation about Reitman. The suit claims, citing information and belief, it accused her of failing to acknowledge the situation. NYU had validated his sexual harassment claims and falsely accusing him of maliciously filing a Title IX claim. Now, this has destroyed his reputation and any hopes of Reitman might have of having a career in the academia. Reitman is a visiting fellow at the Harvard University right now. Now, Ronell responded in a 6-page press release that she had no opportunity to confront, question, or cross-examine Reitman during the Title IX investigation and said no evidence was found of Reitman's alleged sexual contact before and after he became her student. The focus of her release is on the allegations of sexual relationship that NYU couldn't verify not harming findings that formed the basis of her year-long suspicions and suspension without pay. Story 5. An NFL player sues United Airlines over sexual harassment. Can you believe it? Unfortunately, we hear of cases of sexual harassment on planes more often than we should. When flying, people are often trapped next to strangers for extended time periods. There's alcohol, and people often act in ways they shouldn't or wouldn't. However, this is definitely one of the more unusual airline sexual harassment cases I've ever heard of. A suit was in Los Angeles County Superior Court and involves what allegedly happened on February the 10th, red-eye United Airlines flight from Los Angeles to Newark. An NFL player, currently, who doesn't want to release his name, he is simply described as an African American male, claims that a middle aged Caucasian female repeatedly sexually harassed, assaulted, and violated him throughout the flight. And crew did nothing, absolutely nothing, to protect him. There's another man who was seated in the same row who was making similar claims. Now, apparently, the passengers complained to the flight attendant 4 times before they took action. They claimed that the woman was making unwanted sexual advances, including, look out, remember how men were blamed? This is what it alleges. The first time the men alerted the flight attendant that the woman was disruptive and belligerent and intoxicated, number 1. The second time the men alerted the flight attendants was that the woman started making unwanted sexual advances toward the NFL player, massaging his knees and thighs. Now, if you were a man, you'd be thrown off the plane while it was in motion. The third time the men alerted the flight attendant, who was more than an hour into the flight, when the woman grabbed and groped the NFL player. If it was a woman, what would have happened? The fourth time the men alerted flight attendants was when the woman pulled off the protective mask the NFL player was wearing and grabbed his genitals. Oh my God. Now, at this point, the NFL player got out from his seat and complained loudly in front of the plane. He then went to the rear of the aircraft to complain to the flight attendants, at which point the woman was reseated. It took all of this to reseat her? The 2 men are suing United Airlines because the airlines refused to follow policies to respond to sexual harassment and assault, and the airlines also refused to give them the name of the woman, the flight attendants, and potential witnesses. They claim this is a breach of United Airlines' duty to protect and care for passengers. The 2 men are seeking unspecified statutory and punitive damages from the airlines. Now, this is amazing. They're protecting the passengers, but just not those passengers. In closing, let us look behind the scenes to the facts of when men are sexually harassed. In a piece by David M. Ring, the subject of sexual harassment virtually always conjures up thoughts of a man preying on a woman's vulnerable position. It can happen at work, walking down the street, in an educational setting, at a gym, or even in a place of worship. When rumors start to fly, the perpetrator is almost always vilified, and rightfully so. What happens if we flip the script and suddenly the woman is the aggressor, who relentlessly pursues a male coworker to a point of making him uncomfortable to even occupy the same workspace? Very rarely are women thought of as being predatory, but they are, and often under very much the same circumstances as when men display the same behaviors encompassed by sexual harassment. A study conducted by Penn State University in 2015 showed that there was virtually no difference between men and women when it comes to reinforcing attitudes about gender inequality, and therefore sexism has flourished in both directions, not just the sexual harassment of women by men. The numbers are higher than you think. In 2018, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, or the EEOC, disclosed that nearly 20% of all sexual harassment claims reported in the workplace came from male employees. Now, with reports of sexual harassment of men on the rise, the reporting rate is still lower than the number of incidents. One reason? This is that men are also and always have been concerned about the stigma that they endure. Other colleagues and friends, including women, take jabs at their masculinity when they complain about being preyed upon by women. It's always a double standard, in this case, a weird one. And there are key factors in why women sexually harass men, which includes some of the following: anger vented in an unhealthy way, insecurity that manifests in an aggressive manner, retaliation for perceived or actual undermining of authority, a need to control and dominate others, wanting to embarrass and humiliate their targets, to devalue the man in the work or someone who may be seen as a career threat. So it's a game to knock you down a peg in some cases and literal sexual harassment in others. Now, reporting is tough. But not reporting can cause you additional harm. Although it may be inappropriate annoyance, many men simply don't consider sexual harassment by women as threatening, so they don't report it. Now, regardless of how dangerous male victims feel the situation may or may not be, the behavior is still not okay and can escalate. If you are a victim, reporting it through the proper channels may help by creating a record in the event you eventually feel unsafe or experience psychological harm as a result. And it would also cover your tail in case she reverses it. The men who go through being sexually harassed by female aggressors can encounter a variety of difficulties such as anxiety, depression, alcohol and or drug abuse, dropping out of school and or work, quitting work, having a low self-esteem. So you don't have to be a female to face psychological issues. It's a power and control that causes these issues. Protecting men from sexual harassment requires changing our culture. Women who commit sexual harassment can eventually go on to commit sexual assault, just as men do. It is a problem that men have been uncomfortable bringing to the surface because of our culture instilling the idea that men have to be the pillars of strength and that showing emotions equals weakness. Now, female attackers count on this stereotype to get away with damaging criminal behavior all the time. Until women are seen in the same light as men when it comes to perpetrating sexual harassment and sexual assault, the conversations won't change much. So we have to do this. Now, women are typically viewed as victims, but they are equal opportunity assailants. It's just not talked about as much as it should in order to change the perception that we have that men are monsters. Now, sexual harassment is a two-way street, ladies and gentlemen, not one. And the fact that it happens to a man doesn't minimize the seriousness of the behavior. It's still illegal, it's still just as harmful, and men deserve to go to work in a safe environment just like anyone else. So we're going to bring you more of these stories in the future. If this has happened to you, make sure you convey that to us. Give this video a thumbs up, like it, share it with your friend, and give us your story in the comments below. Write your story. Tell us what happened to you, because there are a lot of things that happen to you like it happened to me. We'll see you later. Thank you.